Morning. Thank you. Thank you. I'm David Axelrod, the director of the Institute of Politics, and I welcome you all here today. I need to do one bit of business here for the benefit of the lawyers. This event is part of the IOP's Road to 2016 series of events focused on the 2016 campaign for the White House. The IOP is providing an equal opportunity for all presidential candidates to participate in this series. As a tax-exempt 501c3 organization, the University of Chicago does not support or oppose any candidate for political office. I did it. So, I assume that's for the lawyers. We at the University of Chicago want you to know that your education is meaningful and will pay off in the future. So every once in a while, we like to bring back an alumnus to talk about what they're doing. And so today we're going to hear from, let me see, Bernie Sanders from the class of 64, who I understand is doing some very interesting things these days. He'll speak for about half an hour, and then we'll take questions. There'll be microphones along the side here, and you can queue up there. And we will be giving preference to students, although we won't be asking for IDs. We're going to be very strict on time, though, because the senator has to hot-tail it out of here to get back to Washington for important votes tonight. So please keep your questions short and make sure they're questions. So our speaker today doesn't really need much of an introduction. Senator Sanders is a native of New York City, as you may detect when he begins speaking. As a student here, he led the first civil rights sit-in in the university's history to protest the segregation by race of student housing at that time. In the 1970s, he ran for office unsuccessfully 4 times in Vermont under the banner of the Liberty Union Party, which I think was actually a forerunner of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, I'm not sure. A lesser man may have become discouraged, but the 5th time was the charm. Bernie Sanders was elected mayor of Burlington in 1980 by the whopping margin of 10 votes. He's served 2 terms and went on to, I guess more than 2 because he just told me they were 2-year terms, went on to serve 8 terms in the House of Representatives before his election to the United States Senate in 2006. Throughout those years, he's been a consistent progressive voice in Washington. And now Senator Sanders is a candidate for President of the United States and is currently leading early state polling for the Democratic nomination. Which is actually really something because he's never actually before sought the Democratic nomination for any office. So he's also making history in another way because in the long and storied history of our country, we have never had a president named Bernie. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you all very much for coming out. And let me thank David Axelrod and the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics for inviting me to be with you today. I think, as you know, David is one of the more effective and successful strategists in modern political history, and I'm sure you are going to learn a whole lot from him. Interestingly enough, as I come here to Rockefeller Chapel, this is exactly the place where I was graduated from in 1964, right in this room. And when I think about my years at the university, and I jotted this down on the plane ride from Iowa, I think about many of the excellent and provocative teachers and classes that I had. I think about the physics class that I struggled with endlessly, and the fact that I will not go down in history as one of the great students at the University of Chicago. And I think about the many, many hours that I spent in the basement of Harper Library reading everything except the books that I was supposed to read for the class the next day. Now, don't take that as advice. That's not what I'm suggesting. Do better in school than I did. And I also think about what is somewhat of a painful, difficult memory of coming here as a young man from a family that did not have a lot of money, a family whose mom and dad did not go to college, and suddenly interacting with a whole lot of young people whose families did have money, whose families were often professional. And I would be less than honest in telling you that that transition was a difficult one, in fact. And I have since become a very strong supporter of what we call the TRIO program, which is a program, a federal program, which makes it easier for kids whose parents did not go to college to get into college. I wish I had that program when I was a kid, but mostly, when I think about my experience here, I think about all that I learned. And again, don't take everything that I'm taking literally. Do your homework, study. But I learned a lot from off-campus activities. I learned a lot from folks who were involved and had been involved for decades in the civil rights movement, in the peace movement. I got a job working for a trade union here in Chicago, which introduced me to the trade union movement. I learned here about democratic socialism, and I learned about what the university does so well on campus and all off campus, bringing together people from all over the world. And for me, a lot of that had to do with meeting people who had spent their entire lives, dedicated their lives in the fight for social justice, for making this world a better place in which to live and bring up our kids. And what I learned then, and what I believe today, and it is the kernel of my political views, is that change never takes place from the top down. It always takes place from the bottom on up. It takes place when people, by the millions, sometimes over decades and sometimes over centuries, determine that the status quo, the world that they see in front of them, is not the world that should be. And they come together. And sometimes they get arrested. And sometimes they're on a picket line. And sometimes they die in the struggle. And what human history is about is passing that torch on from generation to generation to generation of young people who pick up the torch that may have begun hundreds or literally thousands of years ago And young people stand in front of the world today and say, no, this is not the world that I am comfortable with. This is the world we are going to change. And I want to say to you that in the midst of very, very difficult times for our country, and I will speak about them in a moment, I also want you to understand that some very, very positive and good things have happened in this country in the last number of decades because people all over this country at the grassroots level stood up and fought back. And as I stand before you today, and I think about my graduation in this building in 1964, I will tell you without the shadow of a doubt, if on that day, June 1964, anyone in that room had said, you know, I think that maybe 44 years later, in 2008, an African American would be elected President of the United States, that this country would overcome centuries of racism and vote for a candidate based on his ideas and not the color of his skin, I will tell you that nobody in that room in 1964 would have thought that was possible, but it happened, and we should be proud of that. And the point is not Barack Obama, who is a friend of mine and who I work with closely, though I disagree with him on a number of issues. It's not Barack Obama. It is the fact that the American people reached the maturity of saying that we are going to vote for the best candidate, not just a white candidate. But it is not just the fight for racial justice, which obviously continues. We've made progress, but we have a long, long way to go. It is on issues of women's rights. When I was here, I don't know the numbers, but I will guarantee you, I don't have the numbers in my head, but I will guarantee you that the number of women at the medical school or at the law school was substantially less than they are today. The fact that we have broken down barriers all over this country so that women could do the work they want to do rather than just quote-unquote traditional women's work made huge progress in the last 40 years. We still have a long way to go, and every day we're seeing it today. The fight against women's rights and the right of women to control their own bodies continues today. But we made progress because women and their male allies stood up and said that we are not going to allow women to be second-class citizens in the United States of America. That's how change takes place. And I will give you another example of change taking place right in front of our eyes. If we were here in 1964, the day that I graduated, and somebody had said, you know, I think, you know, maybe in the year 2015 in the United States of America, gay people would have the right to marry in 50 states in this country. People who said that, anyone who said that would have been thought to be absolutely out of their minds. It was not on anybody's agenda. And yet, because of the struggle of the gay community and their straight allies, enormous success has been made in the last several decades, and we should be very proud of that and the fact that we have made America a much less discriminatory society. And let me just give you another example of a struggle which is taking place today. And that is 4 years ago, 5 years ago. If somebody had said, you know, I think we should raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, people would have said, $15 an hour, you're crazy, it's just 7.25 right now. But then something happened on the West Coast and in the East Coast and in the Midwest. People, often young people, working at fast food restaurants, said, you know what, we can't make it on 7.25 or $8 an hour. And they went out onto the streets, and other people said, yeah, they're right. And today we have cities in America that have raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and I'm going to do my best to make that happen nationally. So my point is that change does happen. We have seen significant change taking place in this country in the last number of decades. Changes that when I graduated, very few people, if any, would have thought would have been possible. But let me also say that while we have made significant progress forward in making our country a less discriminatory society, there are major, major, major issues that confront us today, and we need your help. We need the idealism and the energy and the intelligence of millions of young people to join us in the fight to make America the kind of country we know it must become. And let me briefly touch on some of those issues. Today in the United States of America, we are living in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. And yet the vast majority of the American people do not know that, because many of them are working for $8 an hour or $9 an hour. Many of them are living in poverty. Many of them have no health care. Many of them cannot afford decent child care for their kids. And many of them cannot afford to go to college, even though they have the ability. Today in the United States, we have more income and wealth inequality than any major country on earth, and it is worse today than at any time since 1928. Today in America, the top 0.1% own almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Today in America, 58% of all new income generated is going to the top 1%. Today in America, one family, the Walton family of Walmart, owns more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people. Today in America, in the last 2 years, the wealthiest 14 people saw an increase in their wealth by $156 billion, more wealth than is owned by the bottom 130 million Americans. Today in America, the very rich are becoming much richer. Almost everybody else is becoming poorer, and we need your help to create an economy that works for all of our people, not just the 1%. We need your help on campuses to work with those low-income workers all across this country who are fighting for a living wage. We need your help, men, to stand with the women and fight for pay equity in this country. so that women do not earn 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. And we need a thorough reexamination of values in this country. And let me give you a few examples. Many of my Republican colleagues talk about family values. What they mean by family values is that women in America should not have the right to control their own bodies. I disagree. And what they mean by family values is that our gay brothers and sisters should not have the right to marry. I strongly disagree with that as well. But when I talk about family values, and I've been married 27 years and I have 7 grandchildren, 4 kids, when I talk about family values, I talk about ending the international embarrassment of the United States of America being the only major country on earth that does not guarantee paid family and medical leave. When a woman has a baby, she and the dad should have the right to stay home and get to know and love that baby. But if that woman today is low income or working class, more often than not, she will be separated from that baby after a week or 2 because she's forced to go back to work and take care of her family. That is not a family value. That is the opposite of a family value. And that is why we need to join the rest of the industrialized world and guarantee at least 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave. I am often asked by media and others, they say, well, Bernie, you touch on a number of issues. What is the most important issue? And I can never answer that because all of the issues we deal with are terribly important. But there is one issue that is unique because it impacts every other issue. And let me be as blunt as I can in telling you what many of you already know. And that is, as a result of the disastrous Supreme Court decision in the Citizens United case, the American political system has been totally corrupted. And I do not exaggerate when I tell you that the foundations of American democracy are being undermined. American democracy is not supposed to be about billionaires buying elections. It is not supposed to be about super PACs collecting huge amounts of money from the wealthiest people in this country, having more power over a candidate's campaign than the candidate himself or herself. When you have a situation, which is what we have today, where one family, second wealthiest family in America, the Koch brothers, are spending $900 million in this election cycle. That is more money than either the Democratic Party is spending or the Republican Party is spending. When you have one family, an extreme right-wing family, that spends more money than either of the 2 major political parties, my friends, you are not looking at democracy, you are looking at oligarchy, and we have got to change that. I have not made many campaign promises so far, but one promise I have made that I reiterate to you today. No nominee of mine to the United States Supreme Court will get that job unless he or she is loud and clear that one of their first orders of business will be to overturn Citizens United. And we have got to not only overturn Citizens United, we have got to go further than that if we want to create a vibrant democracy, something I believe in passionately. I want to see our country have one of the highest voter turnouts in the world, not one of the lowest. And by the way, while we're on that subject, let me remind the students here that in the last election in November 2014, 80% of young people did not vote. 63% of the American people did not vote. Now, how we create a vibrant democracy with a large voter turnout takes me to the issue that I believe very strongly about. And that is, if any of you are interested in government and interested in running for office, and I don't care what your views are, you're conservative, progressive, moderate, whatever, but if you have something to offer and you want to get out there, I want you to be able to run for office without begging millionaires for campaign contributions. And that is why I strongly believe in public funding of elections. And there is another issue of enormous importance that I hope you will work with many of us on. Shamefully, the United States of America today has more people in jail than any other country on earth. China is a communist authoritarian country which does not tolerate dissent all that well. They are 3 times our size. We have more people in jail than China, over 2 million people who are disproportionately black and Hispanic. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that, including a broken criminal justice system which needs fundamental reform in a dozen ways. But there is another issue that we don't talk about at all. And by the way, one of the fun things about running for president is you can force discussion on issues that are often swept under the rug. And one of those issues is the tragedy in this country of youth unemployment. We don't talk about it. A couple of months ago, I asked some economists in Washington to do a study for me. And I asked them to tell me what percentage of our young people, high school graduates, not dropouts, high school graduates between the ages of 17 and 20 are unemployed or underemployed. And here's what their answer was. If the young people were white, the number is 33%. If the young people were Hispanic, 36%. If the young people were African American, 51%. In other words, as a nation, we are turning our backs on the young people of this country who want to go out, get a job, become independent, make some money, start a career. And we're saying, no, there is no job available for you. And the truth is, we've got 5.5 million young people hanging out on street corners all over America without jobs and not being in school. And if anyone here thinks there is not a direct correlation between that fact and the fact that we have so many people in jail, you would be mistaken. in my view, it makes a hell of a lot more sense for us to be investing in education and jobs rather than jails and incarceration. Now, I don't know what the tuition is here at the University of Chicago. I guess it's pretty high. But I also would guess that it is cheaper to send a kid to the University of Chicago than to jail. Let's get our priorities right. Let me touch on another subject that Pope Francis mentioned and has mentioned for years, and mentioned when he was here in the United States. And I had the privilege of seeing him both at the White House and the joint session of Congress. And that is, as human beings and adults, we need to understand that it is our responsibility, our moral responsibility, to leave this planet in a way that is habitable and healthy for our children and our grandchildren. And on this issue, the debate is over. I sit on both the Senate Environmental and Energy Committees. I have heard from scientists, not only in our country, but all over the world. There is virtually unanimous agreement that climate change is real, it is caused by human activity, it is already causing devastating problems in our country and around the world. And if we do not get our act together, those problems will only become much more severe. And what the scientists are telling us, that if we do not transform our energy system, we will be looking at more drought, more floods, more extreme weather disturbances, more acidification of the oceans, more rising sea levels. And what the CIA and the Department of Defense are telling us is that in a world where there is limited natural resources, where peoples around the world do not have water, do not have land to grow their crops, there will be more conflict and wars. We have the moral responsibility to work with China and Russia and India and countries all over this world in transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. And here is the very good news on that issue. The good news is we know what has to be done. We know how to move aggressively toward energy efficiency. We have made major breakthroughs in recent years in sustainable energy, and the technology is growing every single day. We can do this. We can combat climate change effectively. What we are lacking now is not the brain power, not the knowledge, not the technology. What we are lacking is the political willpower. And we need your help by the millions to tell Congress to stop worrying about their fossil fuel contributors to their campaigns and worry about their kids and their grandchildren. What I would hope that all of you do, and I understand that, and it's a wonderful thing, there are differences of opinion, that's called democracy, and I love that. But I would hope that all of you are prepared to think big not small. Do not get sucked into this worldview and this debate about whether we cut education by 2% or whether we increase it by 1%. Understand, again, you are living in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. And when we stand together, when we do not allow demagogues to divide us up as to whether we're white or black or Hispanic, whether we are born in this country or born abroad, whether we are straight or gay, whether we're men or women, when we stand together, we can accomplish extraordinary things. Please do not tell me that in the United States of America, at a time when we are seeing a proliferation of millionaires and billionaires, don't tell me that we have to have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. Don't tell me that. Please do not tell me that in this great country, with all of our wonderful doctors and scientists and nurses and medical personnel and administrators, don't tell me that we have to be the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all people as a right. When every psychologist in the world tells us that the most important years of human development are 0 to 4, don't tell me that we cannot have the best child care pre-K system in the world rather than the dysfunctional one we have today. We could do that. And don't tell me that here in Chicago or in Vermont and all over this country that we've got to have senior citizens trying to make ends meet on $12,000, $13,000 a year, buying their medicine, heating their homes, buying the food they need, suffering unnecessarily at a time when Republicans want to cut Social Security. Don't tell me we cannot expand Social Security and provide a decent retirement for all of our people. And when men and women put their lives on the line and do their duty and defend us in war, don't tell me that we have to have veterans in this country sleeping out on the streets. We can provide well for all of our veterans. I ask you, as young people, to stand up and be leaders in this country. I ask you to help us create a nation where every person, no matter their race, their religion, their disability, or their sexual orientation, realizes the full promise of equality that is our birthright as Americans. There is nothing that I am telling you today that is pie in the sky, that is utopian. Nothing. We can accomplish all of that and more, but we will not accomplish that if 80% of young people do not vote. We will not accomplish that if 63% of the American people do not vote. Now, the truth is that the billionaire class in corporate America and Wall Street and the corporate media have enormous, enormous power. And I would be fooling you if I suggested otherwise. They are very, very powerful people. And they control this country and have controlled this country for a very, very long time. But at the end of the day, while they have the money and while they have the power, we have something that they do not have. And that is, we have the people. And when people stand together, we can win. Thank you very much.